Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And having been a nurse for over 40 years and being in the healthcare system, I think there are a lot of things that we could do to reform healthcare, and we had a great chance to do that. We missed our chance. But let me go back to IPAB, because as an elected official and also someone who believes in the Constitution, I believe that this IPAB is a very, very serious breach in what Congress should have the authority to do. So there's unprecedented power here to an unelected board. And I really believe that it is misnamed because it says it's an independent payment advisory board, but it's not just advisory. It has muscle, it has strength. And where I have the concern about this is currently the law says that the Independent Payment Advisory Board will kick in with its recommendations looking at Medicare growth at GDP plus 1%. The President has also come out and said that he believes that we need to lower that even to 0.5%. Secretary Sebelius was here just a bit ago, and she made a great deal of emphasis on the fact that Congress has the ability to be able to make these recommendations before the board kicks in. But let me go to why I think that's a really misinformation piece, is that currently GDP is growing at somewhere between 3 to 4%, and I think I'm right on that. Medicare is around 7%, and if we've got such a low threshold of saying GDP plus 1%, IPAB's going to kick in pretty quickly. And when they kick in and they give these so-called recommendations, they're not just recommendations. From my understanding is that they are indeed going to be law or made changes to the way we currently operate unless there's a 2/3 override, which is a very, very high standard, and we all know how difficult it is to get 2/3 for anything unless it's naming a post office. So I have a real problem with that, in addition to the problem with transparency and how this board is going to operate behind closed doors without public opinion, public comment, and so on. What I'd like to hear from each of the members of the panel here is, do you believe that there is a constitutional problem with having a board making decisions that are going to become law without them being elected officials?
I am not a constitutional lawyer, but I do think it is at odds with conventional congressional practice and allocation responsibility and oversight. And I find it troubling from that perspective alone. I'm also a bit mystified by some of the other discussion about it. So there's been the notion that somehow it's just a bunch of smart people who will give ideas for payment systems reform to the Congress, and then you guys will take care of it. There exists such a group. It's called MedPAC. I served on MedPAC. It's where they send old CBO directors to die. And if it's just a matter of advice, this brings nothing new to the table and thus will replicate the failure of MedPAC. There's also the notion that it guarantees other successes in the bill. That's not true. I mean, let us stipulate for a moment that the Center for Innovation at CMS will actually do something. I'm skeptical, but let's suppose it really does. There's nothing that it can think of that they can put into rulemaking, get implemented, and actually produce results in a year. Those are big changes in payment systems and delivery systems. Everyone knows those are important. They're not going to happen in a year. So, in fact, IPAB's structured to squash any unlikely success you'd get out of the Center for Innovation. So I think it's at odds with conventional practice in its setup. I think it's internally inconsistent with what is claimed for the Affordable Care Act, and that's why I think it's a deep policy error.
I do think that IPAB goes further than any legislation, any board in my experience, and that it has not only the ability to have the force of law, but there's no administrative or judicial review. And its provisions go into effect unless Congress reaches extremely high hurdles in overruling it, and then, as we discussed earlier, having to achieve the same targets. And I think that Doug makes an important point in that the CBO has already shown it's not going to score quality improvements as really showing meaningful savings, especially in the one-year time frame that the IPAB has. And so its only tools really are going to be more cuts in payments on the existing fee-for-service system. And we know where that goes, and we know where that leads as far as payment rates and access to physicians. So I think the miracle that Ms. Moore was talking about earlier is Part D, we know that the marketplace competition consumer power will get prices cost down for government programs, and that must be the way we go.